I'm feeling something around timing in this energy. A delay. A realization that arrived after the fact, after the door had already closed or the distance had already grown too wide. And what's interesting is that this doesn't feel like a reading about endings exactly. It feels more like a reading about waking up. About someone, not necessarily you, but someone connected to your energy, finally seeing clearly what they couldn't see, or maybe wouldn't see, when it mattered most. Take a moment. Does this feel familiar? That particular exhaustion that comes not from the loss itself, but from the fact that you saw it coming for so long, and you tried, and somewhere along the way you just got tired of trying to be seen? Because that's what I'm feeling first in this energy. A kind of weariness that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. You might have been the person who still showed up. Still answered the messages, still made space, still gave the benefit of the doubt one more time and then one more time after that. Not because you were weak, but because something in you recognized something in them, something real, something beneath the surface of how they were behaving, and you couldn't quite walk away from that recognition even when everything else was telling you that maybe you should. That recognition is important. Hold on to that, because we're going to come back to it. The energy I'm sitting with right now feels like pure soul recognition, not in a romanticized, everything is perfect kind of way, but in that raw, slightly uncomfortable way where you look at another person and you just know them. Know them in a way that bypasses logic. In a way that sometimes even bypasses what you want to feel. Have you ever met someone and had that immediate sense of familiarity, like you've known each other before in some way you can't explain? And then had the very confusing experience of watching that person act in ways that seem to contradict everything you sensed about who they really were underneath? That's the tension I'm feeling here. There was something genuine at the foundation of whatever this connection is or was. I don't want you to let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of that. What you felt was real. The soul-level recognition was real. But I'm also feeling that somewhere along the way, there was a disconnect between who this person truly is and how they were actually showing up. And for a long time, I think you were loving the real version of them while trying to navigate the version that kept disappointing you. That's exhausting in a way that's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. Because from the outside it can look like you're making excuses for someone. But from the inside it feels like you're just holding a truth about them that they haven't fully claimed for themselves yet. This is interesting. I'm getting a strong sense that whoever is connected to your energy, there was a loyalty present. A deep, almost stubborn loyalty. And I want to be careful here because I'm feeling this on both sides of this connection. Actually, there's loyalty in your energy, and there's loyalty in theirs, but the way it was being expressed was so different that it might not have even looked like loyalty from where you were standing. Let me sit with this for a moment, because there's more here than it first appeared. When I'm looking at the loyal energy in this connection, the one that's coming through strongly right now, it doesn't feel performative. It doesn't feel like someone who was loyal because it was easy or convenient. It feels like someone who stayed committed to something, to a version of this connection, even when they probably should have examined whether that commitment was still serving anyone. And I'm hearing something like, they stayed because leaving felt like a betrayal of something they believed in. Not of you, necessarily, or not only of you, but of something they had decided this connection meant. Some story they had built around it. Does that resonate for anyone watching? Sometimes the people who hurt us most are doing it from inside their own loyalty to a story they haven't updated yet. That doesn't make it okay. But it does make it complicated in a way that grief rarely lets you acknowledge cleanly. And the grief in this energy, because there is grief here, quiet and deep, the grief isn't just on your side. That's what's shifting in the energy right now. I'm feeling a turn, like something has recently changed in the energetic atmosphere of this situation. Something has cracked open. Not violently, more like the way ice slowly gives way in early spring. You don't see the moment it happens, but then one day the water is moving again. I think whoever this person is, they are in the early and deeply uncomfortable stages of facing a truth they have been avoiding. And that truth has something to do with you. With what you actually needed. With what they consistently, consciously or not, failed to provide. And what I find emotionally significant about this moment is that the realization isn't landing as a small thing for them. It's landing as something that is disrupting the way they've been understanding the whole story. This is interesting, and I want to be honest with you about what I'm sensing here because I think it matters. For a long time, there may have been a version of events in this person's mind where they were doing enough. Where whatever they gave was justified, was proportional, was fair. And maybe they told themselves that you were too sensitive, or too demanding, or that you wanted things they just couldn't give. Not because they genuinely believed you were wrong, but because it was easier than sitting with the discomfort of knowing they were falling short. People do this. We all do this in different ways, construct a narrative that protects us from the parts of ourselves we're not ready to look at. But something has happened, or is happening, that is making it harder to maintain that narrative. And I'm feeling that it might be your absence. Your stillness. The fact that you've pulled back in some way, whether emotionally or physically or both, and in that space, something has become visible that wasn't visible before. It's almost like, when you were present and actively engaging, even in conflict, even in pain, they could keep the focus on the dynamic between you. On what you were doing, what you were feeling, what you were asking for. But in your absence, there's nothing to deflect onto. And what's left is just them, with themselves, and the question of who they have been in this connection. That is a confronting place to be. And I don't say that with any satisfaction, I genuinely feel compassion for anyone who is having to face themselves honestly, because it's one of the harder things a human being can do. But I also want to name that what you're sensing, if you're sensing a shift in their energy, is probably real. You're not imagining this energy. Something is genuinely moving in them. Now here is where I want to be very gentle with you, because this next part of the energy is important for where you are personally. The realization that's happening in this other person, whether it's someone romantic, or a close friend, or a family member, this applies across the board, their realization is not your rescue. I feel like I need to say that clearly, because I think some of you watching are holding your breath a little bit, waiting to see if this shift in them means things are going to change, means you might finally be seen and acknowledged in the way you always deserved. And they might. I'm not here to close any doors for you. But there's a difference between someone waking up and someone being ready to do the work that waking up requires. And right now I'm only feeling the waking up part. What I'm also feeling, and this is the part that I think is actually most significant for your personal journey, is that something in you has already started to let go of needing their realization to validate your experience. Some of you are further along in this than others, and that's okay. This is a collective reading after all, and everyone is in their own place in this story. But there is a version of you that is beginning to, or has already started to, trust your own perception again. To stop second-guessing what you felt and what you knew. And that is worth more than any apology, honestly. The energy keeps circling back to this idea of something that was given but not received in the spirit it was offered. Like there was a version of love, of care, of effort, of vulnerability that you extended, and it landed somewhere it wasn't fully appreciated. Not because it wasn't worthy of appreciation, but because the person receiving it wasn't yet in a place to understand what it meant. What it cost you. What it said about your heart. I'm hearing something like, and I want to share this carefully because channeled messages are always personal, and I encourage you to take only what resonates, something like, they know now. A quiet, simple knowing. Not an announcement, not yet a declaration. But an interior knowing that has started in them. And underneath that knowing is something that honestly feels quite heavy. A kind of grief that they may not have expected to feel. Because here's what I think is happening in their inner world right now, and I want to paint this picture slowly because I think it's important. When we build a narrative to protect ourselves from feeling like we've done something wrong, we often don't realize how much we're also blocking our ability to feel what we genuinely had. And now, as that narrative starts to dissolve, it's not just the discomfort of accountability that's rushing in, it's also the full emotional weight of what this connection actually was. What it actually meant. What they actually had access to in you, and what they didn't fully honor. There's something almost bittersweet about this, in the most human way. Because sometimes we don't know what we have until we've already created conditions that make it very difficult, if not impossible, to get it back. And I feel that theme very strongly right now. The loss feeling bigger now than it did in the moment of losing it. The absence more present than the presence ever fully was. Does that land for someone? That specific ache of having someone realize your worth after the fact? It's not satisfying in the way you might have imagined it would be. Or maybe it is, for a moment. And then it's just sad. For everyone involved. The energy shifts here. I want to acknowledge that. There is a kind of soul that takes on more weight than their share in connections. That sees the potential in others and gives generously from that place of recognition. That absorbs the confusion and the inconsistency and the hot and cold energy and tries to make sense of it, tries to stay patient, tries to hold space even when their own needs are going unmet. If that sounds familiar, and for many of you watching, I believe it does, I want to offer you something that I feel very clearly in this energy. That capacity in you is not the problem. The way it was used in this particular situation may have needed to shift, yes. The pattern of giving more than you received, of staying longer than was healthy, of hoping that your steadiness would eventually reach someone who wasn't ready to be reached, those are things worth examining, worth learning from. But the core of it, that deep well of perception and loyalty and love that you carry, that is a gift. It is yours. It didn't belong to this situation even though you poured it into this situation. And it will still be yours on the other side of whatever this is. The energy around you feels like someone who is genuinely good. Not perfect, none of us are, but oriented towards something real, something authentic. And I think sometimes that quality makes us magnets for people who are still working toward that authenticity in themselves. It's not fair. But it is a pattern worth recognizing. Let me come back to the bitter realization energy, because I don't want to gloss over it. I want to spend a moment with the energy around recognition, because I feel it strongly as we move toward the close of this reading. There is something about this journey, whatever it has been for you personally, whatever chapter of this story you're in, that is ultimately about you learning to recognize yourself. To be for yourself what you were perhaps trying to be for someone else. To see your own value with the same clarity you brought to seeing theirs. That might sound like a cliché, and I understand if it does. But I mean it in a very specific, practical way. The recognition you offered this person, that soul-level seeing, that patient, steady awareness of who they could be, you have access to that same capacity when you turn it inward. When you apply it to your own story. Your own becoming. Your own worth. And the truth is, some of the depth you've developed through this experience, the emotional intelligence, the hard-won self-awareness, the capacity to feel things fully and still keep standing, that didn't exist in quite the same way before. I'm not saying the pain was necessary in some cosmic justification kind of way. But I am saying that you are not the same person you were when this began, and some of what you've become is worth acknowledging. The energy is settling now. Not because everything is resolved, it may not be, at least not externally, but because there is a quiet that is beginning to feel less like emptiness and more like space. Space for something new, even if you don't know yet what that something is. I'm feeling that for many of you, the next chapter has a quality of lightness to it that hasn't been available for a while. Not because everything is suddenly easy, but because you're beginning to let go of the weight of a connection that asked more from you than it gave back. And in that letting go, or in that beginning to let go, wherever you are in the process, something is becoming available to you. Room to breathe. Room to be known in the way you deserve to be known. Room to let the right people see you without you having to work so hard to be visible. You were never invisible. You were just in the wrong light for a while. Wherever you are tonight, whatever brought you to this reading, I want you to know that the fact that you feel things deeply, the fact that you love this much, tried this much, cared this much, that is not your weakness. That is your signature. Your particular way of moving through the world. And the right connections, the ones that are still ahead of you, will not ask you to shrink that. They will finally meet it. Take good care of yourself. And thank you for being here.